The views expressed by participants in this podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the producers, sponsors, or promoters of this production or their affiliates. Washington University in St. Louis does not directly endorse advertisers' products or services.
I'm Liberty Vittert, and this is Amended, my guide to the First Amendment. The United States is a land of really remarkable diversity and home to thousands of religions. Some worship Jesus, some worship Allah, some worship nothing at all, and some worship spaghetti.
A Madison man has won the fight to wear a spaghetti strainer on his head in his driver's license photo.
The attorney for the man says his client is, quote, Pastafarian and was denied his religious right as a member of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monsters.
Perhaps you've never heard of this church. I had not. And, while it might sound silly, when it comes to their constitutional rights, they are very serious.
This man says it took him years to take his driver's license photo with a colander on his head. He believes he's the first person in the state to win this right for his religion, the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster.
They've even given the prayer at the beginning of city council meetings.
May the great flying spaghetti monster rouse himself from his stupor and let his newly appendages ground each assembly member in their seats, reminding them of the purpose of their election to this body.
The Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster highlights some of the really thorny topics the country has long wrestled with in trying to honor the freedom of religion clause in our First Amendment. And religion is the first freedom identified in the First Amendment and the only freedom that is protected in two different ways. It was clearly critically important to the Founding Fathers. And as a reminder, here's what the First Amendment says about religion.
Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
So to summarize, Congress can't make laws to favor a religion or keep people from practicing a religion. It seems very simple, right? But it's not at all. Americans have been fighting over how to define religion and what exactly the First Amendment protects since long before the quirky Madison man put a metal colander on his head and called it worship. In this episode, we're going to dive into some of the foundational elements of freedom of religion in this country, and some of the strangest. We'll discuss the outsized importance of Jehovah's Witnesses in American constitutional law, and how the Supreme Court is redefining the First Amendment today. And we'll certainly look at how one unlikely religious group with a very dark sense of humor continues to push the boundaries of acceptability. Here's Joshua McDaniel, a professor at Harvard Law School and the director of its Religious Freedom Clinic.
So, one, the Establishment Clause is a clause that says that the government can't establish religion. And then the flip side of that is the free exercise of religion. And so, as opposed to the government affirmatively coercing you, the government also needs to allow you the space to practice your own religion and can't punish you for it and can't prevent you from practicing your religion unless it has a compelling good reason to do so.
And here's Michael Helfand, a professor at Pepperdine University's School of Law, with a little more nuance.
So one thing you'll notice about something like the First Amendment is that it explicitly applies to Congress. It says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And the First Amendment, like all the amendments, were originally understood to apply to the federal government, not to states.
That's a juicy detail you can pull out at a dinner party to impress your friends.
Wow.
We think of the First Amendment as this untouchable, all-powerful piece of law that would instantly shut down any state or local nonsense, right? Like, boom, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, case closed. But for over a century after the Constitution was ratified, that's not how it worked at all.
The idea was that this Bill of Rights is supposed to constrain, the First Amendment is supposed to constrain the federal government. It's a crazy thing to think about, that for a long period of time, actually the First Amendment doesn't apply to the states. The states can kind of look at the First Amendment and say, cool, that's for the federal government, but we states, we can do what we want.
And so if you had a situation where you felt like the government was violating your free speech rights, it depends on the question of, well, which government are you talking about? If you're talking about the U.S. government, then you could say, okay, well, the Bill of Rights protects me against that. But say the state of Missouri is infringing on your free speech rights, you have no protection under the Bill of Rights because it applies only to the federal government at that time.
This all changed with the passing of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution.
So after the Civil War, we had a series of amendments to the Constitution that chiefly were aimed at shoring up civil rights protections for these new Black citizens in the country. It said specifically the states, they have to ensure due process of law before life, liberty, or property can be taken away. They need to ensure equal protection of the laws. And so these are provisions that are intended to help Black citizens, but also that are more broad than that. They apply to anyone.
The 14th Amendment guarantees due process and equal protection under the law. We'll cover it in season 14 of Amended, but for now, you just need to know that over time, the Supreme Court interpreted the 14th Amendment to apply to the First Amendment. There's a term for this: incorporation. It's the process by which, over decades and decades, the Supreme Court says, hey, the First Amendment, it covers the behavior of all governments in the USA, states and counties and towns.
It was highly controversial. It's not obvious that you would take the text of the Due Process Clause and say that what that means is we should interpret it to say that the previous amendments should also apply to the states.
And for freedom of religion, the case to know is Cantwell v. Connecticut. So let's go back to April of 1938 and meet three men in New Haven, Connecticut, who were fervent in their religious devotion.
Three Jehovah's Witnesses, Newton, Cantwell, and his two sons, take to the streets in New Haven, Connecticut. They're pulling out a phonograph.
That's a old-timey word for a record player. I Googled that.
And they're on the street kind of setting up the phonograph, and they're playing it. Phonograph recording that is pretty targeted and pointed about being against the Catholic Church. And they're playing it in this predominantly Catholic area.
Newton Cantwell and his sons were trying to win converts to join the Jehovah's Witnesses, a newish Christian sect that was found in the late 19th century and based on minimalism and fervent proselytizing. You may have seen them near parks, bus stops, other public places, and you may have even had them come to your house. And they do that a lot, and it helped the witnesses grow very, very fast. Newton Cantwell and his sons are on a street corner in New Haven playing a record called Enemies. Here's part of that recording.
There are millions of others now on the earth who will go down in death during Armageddon and who will be awakened out of death and be given an opportunity to obey the Lord and live. The warning must be given to those of Christendom who claim to be on the side of the Lord but who are not, and who are pursuing a lawless or iniquitous course and which are described in the Scriptures as wicked.
Those are some feel-good vibes, right? And, as you might imagine, some people in this very Catholic neighborhood were very offended by this doomsday record, and they told the police.
All three were convicted of a charge of soliciting without a permit. And then one of the two sons was, in addition to that, charged with breach of peace, basically for creating disorder on the streets.
Connecticut had a law requiring anyone soliciting funds in public to first get a certificate from a state official. Ostensibly, it was to protect the public from fraud, and there was an exemption for religious activity. But to the Cantwells and other Jehovah's Witnesses, the requirement to first get permission from a state official was an intolerable restriction on their religious rights. So the Cantwells decided to fight their conviction. And on March 29th, 1940, the Cantwells got their day in the Supreme Court. And less than 2 months later, in a unanimous decision, the court overrules the state of Connecticut, finding that the Cantwells' conviction violates both the First and the 14th Amendments.
One of the reasons why the Cantwell versus Connecticut decision is so important and such a landmark case was it was the first case to squarely recognize that the free exercise clause of the First Amendment is incorporated against the states.
There's that word, incorporated. The idea that constitutional rights apply to government at all levels in the United States. And that concept evolved in part based on the actions of a single religious group, the Jehovah's Witnesses. And this group might be small, but they've truly had an outsized influence on American law.
You can't take a First Amendment class in law school without encountering a whole slew of cases brought by Jehovah's Witnesses.
So why are they appearing in all these cases? Part of the reason lies in the group's intense focus on public proselytizing, and it can be really annoying. But another important reason is that Jehovah's Witnesses have religious beliefs that have been, at times, out of sync with predominant American ideologies. They're minimalists in their personal life. They don't believe in celebrations like birthdays, for example. And there was another aspect of their beliefs that put Jehovah's Witnesses at really the forefront of religious freedom cases.
They believe in not participating in politics. They don't vote in elections. They don't lobby in the legislature. And as a result of that, if they're being persecuted or if their rights are being taken away, they don't have political recourse. They can't vote in elections or they can't go lobby to get protection. And their only means of getting that protection is by going to court and by seeking the protection from judges under the First Amendment. And that's really the only pathway.
The U.S. Supreme Court ruled today in favor of religious groups looking for converts. The court decided Jehovah's Witnesses and others have the right to knock on doors without permission from local governments.
They've actually been extraordinarily influential in terms of bringing cases all the way to the Supreme Court over and over and over again. Really, it's hard to overstate how much of an impact their litigation has had on kind of everyday rights and freedoms that you and I have.
And much of that impact comes down to this same idea of incorporation. The idea of incorporation became the foundation of a ton of major Supreme Court cases that protected the religious rights of all of us, from practitioners of the most ancient faiths to the colander-wearing congregants of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. But incorporation also established set precedents that help secure rights that have absolutely nothing to do with religion.
One of the really interesting historical things is you look at the Black Civil Rights Movement in almost exactly the same way that local towns and cities and states were trying to shut down Jehovah's Witnesses and apply permitting and other types of ordinances to prevent them from being able to share their message. They use all of the same tools and all of the same criminal charges to try to silence Black civil rights activists and protesters. And some of those cases end up going to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the really fascinating thing is that over and over again, the Supreme Court turns to the Jehovah's Witness cases, and in particular, Cantwell versus Connecticut, to protect the right of civil rights activists to engage in their speech.
And while Cantwell and other Jehovah's Witnesses cases help secure really important freedoms and protections, they also open the door to a much trickier question. When should there be limitations to those rights? In fact, over the last 10 years or so, the Supreme Court has widened the reach of the Free Exercise Clause, saying it covers behaviors that it never really did before.
The United States Supreme Court rules in favor of a Lakewood baker, saying he had the right to refuse to bake a wedding cake for a gay couple.
The justices ruled that private corporations can reject insurance coverage of birth control based on their religious beliefs.
The Supreme Court sides with parents who sued on behalf of religious rights. Justices are siding with a group of Maryland parents saying they may pull their children from public school lessons that use storybooks with LGBTQ characters or topics. The parents argue they have religious objections to the content.
While the exact boundaries of the Free Exercise Clause remain in flux, the general legal consensus is that government really needs a good reason to interfere with a people's religious practices. The other side to freedom of religion, called the Establishment Clause, remains very much contested.
The Establishment Clause is kooky. That's probably the best way to describe it.
Once again, law professor Michael Helfand.
Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. What does that mean? Nobody's really sure. That's just the gosh honest truth. Over the years, people have given very different glosses to it. Very famously, Thomas Jefferson, in his letter to the Baptists, it's like a wall of separation between church and state. And that kind of metaphor has captured the imagination of many. What that means is there should be a wall of separation between church and state. Maybe. I mean, that's one guy's take, really important guy, but not everybody's take. And it's in a letter. It's not in the legislative history, so nobody's really sure.
Here's another dinner party fact to amaze your friends and family. When the Bill of Rights was ratified, many states actually had established state religions with official churches and absolutely everything that goes along with that.
I think the most well-known thing that states with establishments would do is that they would have tithing for churches, or not necessarily tithing, but taxes that would go to churches.
And that was widespread. 8 of the 13 British colonies had established religions and churches. The Congregational Church in Massachusetts, for example, and the Anglican Church in South Carolina. And these churches held real economic and political power. But over the course of the 19th century, states all but gave up their established religions. And then in the mid-20th century, the Supreme Court adopted a particular approach to interpreting the Establishment Clause called strict separation.
So when we talk about strict separation, what we're talking about is taking Thomas Jefferson's metaphor very seriously, a wall of separation between church and state, meaning the two should never touch each other in any which way. It means that government should in no way be propping up or inhibiting, advancing or inhibiting religion. It shouldn't be engaging in any conduct that somehow promotes religion through the government's use of its resources, its authority, its power.
And the place where strict separation comes up again and again is in Supreme Court cases involving public education.
What you have is government-sponsored prayers in public schools. This was something that was quite common for a sub-period of time. And this becomes one of the big battles of the Establishment Clause in the 50s and 60s.
And for 16-year-old Ellery Shemp in Abington, Pennsylvania, in 1956, government-sponsored prayer did not seem right.
Well, my name is Ellery Shemp. I guess I'm a little bit known because there was a Supreme Court case about Bible reading and prayer in the public schools, and the case is known as Abington versus Shemp, so I'm that Shemp.
In 1949, Pennsylvania passed a law that 10 verses of the Holy Bible must be read at the beginning of every school day.
Of course, it was the teacher who read the Bible. And I thought this was particularly silly. And well, I resented it because it didn't make any sense. There's nothing in the Constitution about the Bible, about prayer, about the 10 Commandments, about God. Nothing in the Constitution mentions anything about any of these commandments.
And in November of 1956, I came to the conclusion that I would make a protest against this.
So on November 26, 1956, Ellery Shemp protested the daily classroom Bible readings in a unique and some would say controversial way.
My friend Tapper's father had a copy of the Koran in his library. So I brought the Koran to school, knowing that we would have these morning devotions. And I just pulled out my borrowed copy of the Koran, and I sat there reading it to myself. And then I did not stand up for the Lord's Prayer.
His teacher was not pleased, to say the least.
So he came over to me afterwards and said, well, look, you have to stand up for the Lord's Prayer and whatever. And I said to him, in conscience, I can no longer participate in these morning exercises. And he was aghast. I remember his expression to this late night now. And then he sent me off to the school principal. And he decided that he had a very disturbed young man on his hands.
But Ellery's Unitarian father didn't seem to mind. In fact, he sounds kind of downright proud talking about it in an interview from that time.
Ellery thinks for himself, no question that. As Unitarians, we all claim to think for ourselves, and he did this asking whether we would back him if he protested, and of course we said we had to back him.
It was arranged, instead of going to homeroom for checking in with attendance, I would go to the counselor's office, sit there during the exercises, then go on to algebra class, history, English, whatever. So that's how it all worked out.
But Ellery didn't love this arrangement because it singled him out as an outlier, which was really the opposite of what he wanted.
In fact, in a certain way, it makes it worse. Because in order for a child to be excused, you would have to stand up, you have to self-identify as being the center, self-identify as being a nonconformist. So identifying yourself as the center, that's totally unacceptable. That makes the situation worse.
So instead, Ellery decided to write an impassioned letter to the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. The letter lives on in the National Archives, and Ellery was kind enough to read it for us.
American Civil Liberties Union, Philadelphia, PA, gentlemen. As a student in my junior year at Abington Senior High School, I would very greatly appreciate any information that you might send regarding possible union action and or aid in testing the constitutionality of Pennsylvania law, which arbitrarily and seemingly unrighteously and unconstitutionally compels the Bible to be read every day in our school classrooms. And I thank you for your help you might offer in freeing American youth in Pennsylvania from this gross violation of their religious rights as guaranteed in the First and Foremost Amendment in our United States Constitution. Sincerely yours, Ellery F. Schempp. Their executive directors thought it was kind of interesting and wrote back to me and said, we're interested in taking up your case.
They filed a case in a district court in Pennsylvania.
And we won 3-0, a unanimous court case.
While the case began its slow climb to the Supreme Court, Ellery graduated, but the case lived on through his two younger siblings, Roger and Donna, who were in the same school district. It was a hard time for the entire family. They were called Satanists, communists, you name it.
There were some girlfriends that were forbidden by their parents from meeting with Donna ever again because Donna was considered Satan and satanic. And when the school bus came down the road, the street of our house, the kids would lean out the window, now passing the communist camp. So Donna was deeply hurt, and Roger was pushed around and shoved down. Our family received more than 5,000 letters. And this is before the days of internet and Google and all that sort of thing. They would simply write on the envelope, the communists of Rosslyn, Pennsylvania, and Bible-hating Rosslyn, Pennsylvania. And the post office would deliver them to us. So we got almost 5,000 letters.
The case slowly worked its way through the appeals process until it finally reached the Supreme Court.
42, School District of Abington Township, Pennsylvania, the Held Appellants versus Edward Lewis Schempp.
Philip Ward, defending the school district, argued that the Bible teaching in this case wasn't to teach religion to students, but to teach them morality.
We're teaching morality without religion, cut adrift from theology. And that is proper for the people of Pennsylvania. We can bring to our children lessons of morality in their school days as long as we're not bringing religion, not bringing theology, in order to keep out any possibility of theology, of doctrine sneaking in. They say it shall be read without comment. They didn't want any possibility of any sectarian or religious instruction.
But the Schempp's lawyer, Henry Sawyer, argued that by virtue of the fact that it was a passage from the Bible that was being read aloud, it was de facto an endorsement of the text.
I don't think that you can use the word morality to encompass all that is purveyed to the minds of children by this book. There will be many, many things read out of the King James Version which will exclusively, if you can separate them, gentlemen, but it will exclusively concern religious concepts and ideas without any distinguishable moral truth.
The court took a few months to render its decision, finally announcing it on June 17, 1963. The court ruled 8-1 in the Schemp's favor.
Well, it had a lot of impacts. Of course, in fact, it changed directly the laws of 32 states that all had some variation of Bible reading and prayer in the public schools.
The Abington case captured the dominant 20th century view of freedom of religion, that of the Jeffersonian wall of strict separation between church and state. But over time, cracks began to develop in that wall, and the court started, splitting hairs about what counted as legal and what didn't. Here's Michael Helfand again.
It's not like you just have a straight line and it's easy to figure out what's going on. And as a result, you already kind of baked in within the first, I'd say, 15 years of the Establishment Clause, you get baked in cases that are just at war with each other. We're going to fund buses to religious schools, or we're going to allow books to be loaned to families that are sending their kids to religious schools. And especially when it comes to trying to figure out how these rules should be applied when it comes to prayer in public schools or other kinds of cases.
To make the point, Michael highlights an anecdote about a famous senator from New York, Daniel Patrick Moynihan.
You get this case in 1977, Wallman v. Walters, and there you have 9 different government programs related to private schools where the government was providing funding. The court's like, we can't fund religion unless it's a bus program or it's a books program. But we have also cases that say if it's materials, educational materials, we can't do it. So very famously, Daniel Patrick Moynihan at a congressional hearing says, everyone help me out with this. If it's a book, it's okay. If it's a map, it's not okay. Anybody know what we do with an atlas? Because it's a book of maps. Good or no good? And the doctrine, I think everyone thinks at this point, is somewhat broken, because what does it mean for law to be broken?
And by broken, he means something very specific.
Law is broken when the rules are insufficiently clear to provide predictable outcomes. Because if they can't provide predictable outcomes, they can't incentivize behavior by government officials because they don't know what's going to happen, so they don't know what to do. That's what it means for law to be fundamentally broken. And so nobody's really sure at this point. And by the time you hit the 80s, it's clear that there's a mess. The Supreme Court has a mess on its hands. Its Establishment Clause doctrine is not being predictive.
And not only that, but to many conservative scholars, strict separation also seemed at odds with American history.
There's this view of strict separation that really doesn't know what to do with the historical record. Everybody knows you've had, at the time of the founding, George Washington, you've had Thanksgiving Day invocations, presidential proclamations, you've had all of which had religion as a big feature of them. You've had the government has been paying for a legislative chaplain in Congress to pray before legislative sessions. There's a period of time where the federal buildings in Washington, D.C. were being used as churches. What are you going to do with all that? And you have a rule that says you can't advance religion, but it's clear that at the time of the founding, at least some founders are advancing religion. So how do you want all these different pieces to fit together? And the court has never really figured this out.
And it still hasn't. But in the 21st century, the Supreme Court began moving in a different direction to try and make this part of the law more consistent and predictable. They're changing from a strict separation approach to one that is often described as accommodationist, an approach that does not try to exclude religion completely from the public sphere, but tries to find a role that accommodates it without enshrining it as official. And one case really stands out to demonstrate this shift.
In Kennedy v. Bremerton, just a couple of years ago, the Supreme Court finally says, we've long abandoned these rules.
Kennedy v. Bremerton. The one case symbolizes this shift more than any other and stars a really unlikely plaintiff, a football coach in a small school who becomes the main character in a very big Supreme Court case.
I got kicked out of every single school in the surrounding area in the Puget Sound.
That's Joe Kennedy, the aforementioned plaintiff.
I think I went to 13 different schools, and the only one that would take me and actually had the lowest standards for graduation was Bremerton High School.
Kennedy did graduate, and he went on to serve in the Marines. And after returning home to Washington State, he was offered a position helping to coach the football team at his old school, Bremerton High.
I couldn't tell you a single X and O, but I knew a lot about leadership, team building, and how to get the most out of young men. I was a motivational guy. I was a disciplinarian for the team. So that's the reason why I was really hired for football. I was a head coach for junior varsity and assistant coach for the varsity.
And then one night, shortly after taking the job, he's at home mindlessly channel surfing when he comes across a movie that would change the trajectory of his entire life.
In the middle of the night, I was flipping through the channels and Facing the Giants came on.
Facing the Giants, a 2006 Christian sports movie about a struggling high school football team that finally starts winning after the coach realizes that the real sports playbook is God's.
So I'm here to present you a new team philosophy. We need to give God our best in every area. And if we win, we praise Him. And if we lose, we praise Him.
We did not quit!
Facing the Giants.
I can't believe what I just seen! I cannot believe what I just seen!
And it was like a ton of bricks hit me right in the chest. I heard my calling for the first time, and I'm not very creative, so I just stole it right out of a movie of giving Him the glory after every game, and that's all I did, win or lose, just go out there and take a knee by myself.
His quiet post-game prayer initially started as a solo endeavor.
I would just stop, face the scoreboard, take a knee, and just silently just thank God for being there and being part of the game and what the kids did.
But it didn't stay that way for long.
Had a couple kids that came up and said, "Coach, what are you doing out there after the game?" And I said, I was just thanking God for what they did out there and being part of it. And they asked if they could come out. And I was, come on, guys, this is a free country. Of course you could come out. This is your team.
And then it spread beyond just his players.
So these kids are friends. They grew up together. And they said, "Hey, Coach, can we ask the other team to come out and join us?" And I was like, "Hey, this is your team. If you guys want to do that, knock yourself out." And so they started inviting the other team. And that's where it kind of blew up to something a lot bigger.
And soon it became impossible to ignore. What started as a very quiet, private kneel was now public and loud.
And I would hold up a helmet from the opposing team and our team. That's when the prayers became actually audible and out loud. I never gave it a second thought. I knew what the First Amendment says. You have the freedom of speech and the freedom of religion and, the free exercise. So it was very clear to me that this was not a big deal.
Especially since, from his perspective at least, no one was being forced to join in the prayer ritual.
I did have kids that came over and said, "Coach, hey, I'm not a person of faith. I don't want to join the prayer." And I thought that was cool. And a couple of those guys, actually, I made my team captain. It was never a big deal. Nobody cared.
Well, almost nobody.
I did have parents that came over throughout the years and voiced their concern and said, "Hey, I don't want my kid joining that." And cool. Hey, no problem. You guys are the ones raising your kids. I just get them for a little bit of time on a football field.
And then his troubles started in a way he really could have never seen coming.
And what started the big controversy was actually from a compliment that somebody saw us doing it and said, I got to call their principal and said, "I got to tell you what your football program is doing is awesome."
The compliment was how the school principal realized what was happening, and he panicked, worrying that Joe's post-game kneel was a violation of the Establishment Clause. So he had a serious chat with the athletic director, who had a chat with Joe.
And the next game we had, the athletic director was like, "Hey, you shouldn't do it." And I was really conflicted, and it ended up going into triple overtime in a doubleheader game. And I did a really super quick prayer. It's probably the quickest one I did. It was probably like 7 or 8 seconds. And the athletic director I looked over and he was walking away in a storm, and I started getting a sick feeling in my stomach. And I look over at the head coach and he's shaking his head and he says, they're going to fire you. And that was the first moment that I actually gave thought that this is going to be a problem.
And while he's standing there processing how he might have just prayed himself out of a job, he does the single most 21st century thing imaginable. He posts about his ordeal on social media. And that's how Small Town Joe accidentally created a national culture war.
After I got my guys on the bus, I got my phone out. I did one simple post on, I can't remember if it was on Facebook or Instagram. Then I said, I think I just got fired for praying. And I turned my phone off. I went home and I didn't give it a second thought until the next morning when I turned my phone back on and my phone started ringing and blowing up. And I was like, what the heck is going on? And my wife and I turned on the TV and it's coach fired for praying. So when they talk about viral overnight, this is what happened. The very next day and Saturday morning, it's on every news channel.
High school football coach Joe Kennedy has been put on paid administrative leave because he refused to stop praying in public at football games.
A high school football coach known for praying on the field is now on paid leave. Joe Kennedy refused to comply with the school district's request to stop praying during games and is now facing the consequences.
This made things particularly awkward at home because in an ironic twist of fate, his wife was involved too.
I'm freaking out. My wife's freaking out because she's the head of HR at this time. She's the HR director. So we get on the phone with the superintendent and we were like, Aaron, what are we going to do? What's going on? And he says, well, we'll work it out. We'll work it out this week. And they gave me a letter of direction, said just not pray with the team. I agreed to it. I didn't pray with my team ever again.
So yeah, he stopped praying with the Bremerton High team, but that didn't stop him from praying with other teams.
But the very next game, the opposing team came out instead. And that's that famous picture of you see me praying with the opposing team. There wasn't a single Bremerton person in that entire picture. And so the school freaked out about that and didn't know what to do. They were like, how do we navigate this? And they said, just stop praying altogether. And that's where my rub happened.
And just like Ellery, Coach Kennedy believed that the Constitution was on his side. He just saw it in exactly the opposite way.
They gave me the ultimatum to choose between my faith and my job. And I said, no, that's not the way the Constitution works. And I can understand that, yeah, if I was out there telling the kids that they had to take a knee and they had to join me in prayer, that's just as wrong as telling somebody that they cannot. I thought we were in the clear the whole entire time.
For Ellery, having the choice to opt out of prayer singled him out, and he felt that that didn't constitute real freedom. Coach Kennedy, on the other hand, saw choice as the whole point, believing that voluntary participation in religious ritual created no problem with the Establishment Clause.
So that's where we really had to become adversarial with each other, is when the school district lawyers got involved and they told me I had to choose between my job and the prayer. So that's when everything became really crazy and they put me on administrative leave. The school district lawyers gave me a letter, do not contact, and I was not allowed to even talk to the superintendent or anybody at the school anymore. And I knew I needed legal help. And that's when First Liberty Institute out of Plano, Texas came and started helping me with my legal side of it.
And so began his multi-year legal fight with the very school and community he loved so much. But this fight didn't just play out in court. Given his wife's job, it also followed him home.
There was millions of Americans that were speaking out against this, and they crashed the school district's phone systems, fax systems, internet. And my wife was at the forefront of that, being the person of HR who has to deal with all of these things. So she's the one handing me these letters of, hey, sorry, you can't come back. So essentially she had to kind of fire me. She didn't have to sign the letter, but she delivered it. And so I had to sue her. We tried to be very civil about it in front of our kids, but kids are smart. They pick up on it.
Joe sued the school district, arguing that his First Amendment rights had been violated. He also sought a preliminary injunction, which is basically a temporary ruling that would put him back in his job while the case played out in court. But both the district court and the Ninth Circuit Court denied his request.
So we appealed to the Supreme Court, which they turned it down because they don't make rulings on injunctions. They said, we need to hear the whole entire case.
Still, the Supreme Court hadn't fully shut the door on this case. In their response, 4 justices called his firing, quote, troubling, and suggested that the case might need future review. This was basically a legal wink to Coach Kennedy to keep going, so he did. As the case crawled its way through the lower courts and he kept losing, his only remaining option was to get to the Supreme Court. And that scared him, because this was no longer just about getting his job back. It was about fundamentally changing the rules around prayer in public schools nationwide.
The thing that was weighing on my heart and on my shoulders was, and made me age so much, was that if I lost, what are those implications? Now, forever, I would have been the one that screwed it up for the religious freedom of all Americans and the freedom of speech. So that was my fear. I wasn't worried about winning. I was worried about what happens if I lose. What implications does that have?
Happening today, the U.S. Supreme Court set to hear the case of a former Bremerton High School football coach, Joe Kennedy.
With a more conservative Supreme Court, attorneys for the school district are concerned about the ruling and its impact, fearing it might inspire other educators to engage in religious practices.
We'll hear argument first this morning in case 21-418, Kennedy versus Bremerton School District.
Famed constitutional lawyer Paul Clement was the lead counsel for Joe Kennedy. Here he is talking to Justice Clarence Thomas about whether the school district violated the coach's right to freely practice his religion, his right to free speech, or both.
Below, you had a free exercise claim and you had a free speech claim. Which are you pursuing? Are you pursuing both now, or are you pursuing them separately, or is this a sort of a hybrid claim argument you're making?
So, Justice Thomas, we are pursuing them both. They're both fully preserved in this court, but I do think you're right in the sense that this is a hybrid-type case in which the free speech clause and the free exercise clause reinforce each other. And I think it directly reinforces how the court should approach the case.
The school district's lawyer was Richard Katsky, who took a page out of Ellery Shemp's book and argued that even when prayer is optional, it can still put pressure on kids.
Kennedy's rights would still have to be balanced against the district's interest in controlling its events and messages, protecting the religious freedom rights of the students and their parents, and managing the workplace. Some of these kids were just 14 years old. Mr. Kennedy's actions pressured them to pray and also divided the coaching staff, sparked vitriol against school officials, and led to the field being stormed and students getting knocked down. When Mr. Kennedy repeatedly ignored sincere efforts to accommodate personal prayers, what was the district to do?
2 months later, the court handed down its decision.
We begin with that breaking news. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court has ruled that a high school football coach has the First Amendment right to pray on the field after games. It's another big win for religious exercise and potentially expanding the ability of public employees to practice their faith openly on the job.
Here's Harvard law instructor Joshua McDaniel to explain what this all meant.
The majority essentially said, well, we're really focused on what he was punished for, and that's the question that we're looking at. And we think if he's just by himself, this is kind of after his duties are over, he's kind of engaging in this speech as a private citizen at that point. So if that's the fact pattern, then we're going to say he has both a free speech right and a free exercise right to take a knee and to say the prayer.
And to McDaniel, this squares with how the Establishment Clause has historically been interpreted.
I think the Establishment Clause still serves an extremely important purpose, and that we do need to be watchful of the government not coercing people with respect to religions. But I think there's a balance to be achieved there, and I think it can be done in a way where these clauses are not at odds with each other and that they work in the same direction.
But he wonders if the Kennedy decision might open the door to reappraising prior cases.
So Abington versus Shemp is part of a line of Establishment Clause cases in the Supreme Court that was about mandatory daily Bible readings and prayer in public school. And the court held that that violated the Establishment Clause. And I think this is going to be one of the open questions after Kennedy is, should a case like that be revisited?
Michael Helfand, on the other hand, thinks it's too early to tell whether this new accommodationist approach will actually make the law clearer and more predictable, or if it will just create new questions and more confusion.
Now, like, all of Establishment Clause doctrine is about history, like going through history books to try to figure out what they did. And I suspect we're going to try for the next 10, 20, 30 years, and we're going to have to see if it works.
This is really tricky. Things are very different than they were 250 years ago.
I mean, take all these 10 Commandments cases that are now around the country. You have Arkansas, you have Texas, you have Louisiana, enacting laws that say every public school classroom has to have 10 Commandments in the room. So let's look at the historical record, right? That's what you would say. Like, what did they do in the public schools around the founding? So first thing you'd learn really fast is that there were no public schools around the founding. So how are we going to do this comparison? Like, what are we comparing to? You see the problem already, right? You're going to have to find an analogy. Getting the analogy right is what's going to matter if we're going to think that this new record is working.
For Joe Kennedy, the ruling meant he could go back to work. So on September 1st, 2023, he returned to Bremerton High football field.
All right, for the first time in nearly 8 years, a Bremerton assistant coach was back under the Friday night lights. It was Joe Kennedy's highly anticipated return to Bremerton Memorial Stadium.
I got to do my prayer back on the 50-yard line for the game, my first game back, and it was the only thing I asked for, and that's what I returned to do. I prayed by myself. Nobody even batted an eye, and that's the way it should have been. Then nobody cares if you see somebody of faith in the public square.
But in the years since his firing, he had moved to Florida, so he resigned his position after just one game.
And instead of staying there and being a conflict of interest everywhere and being this huge annoyance to the school district, I thought it was better just to be able to walk away.
Joe walked away, but we're left with a bigger question. If you expand religious liberties for everyone, you can't pick and choose which religions get that freedom. But that doesn't mean people haven't tried. So to close out this episode, we're going to look at a serious group that's testing the limits of freedom of religion in a serious and very darkly humorous way. Like them or hate them, this group evokes a really strong reaction from pretty much everybody.
Federal judge has ordered a Lehigh Valley school district to allow an after-school Satan club. The Silicon Valley School District denied the club from the meeting at the middle school. But a federal judge said that violated the group's First Amendment rights.
I am Lucian Greaves. I am the co-founder of and spokesperson for the Satanic Temple.
The Satanic Temple, based out of Salem, Massachusetts. Of course, this religion isn't at all what you might expect.
We're a non-theistic group, which means we don't believe in Satan as an actual conscious entity with whom we can communicate, but more as a metaphorical construct, a literary construct. To us, Satan is the embodiment of the ultimate rebel against tyranny.
According to its website, the temple sees Satan as a symbol of eternal rebel in opposition to arbitrary authority and believes in reason, empathy, and the pursuit of knowledge.
The Satanic Temple is most widely known for its efforts to promote pluralism, maintain the separation of church and state, and defend liberal democracy from those who would attack it.
Lucian co-founded the Satanic Temple in 2013 with a man named Malcolm Jerry. It started as a protest against Florida Governor Rick Scott, who had signed a bill allowing public school students to read inspirational messages at assemblies and sporting events, a move that Lucian and many others saw as a way to get around Ellery v. Schempp and the Supreme Court's ruling against mandatory prayer in school.
So then we conceived of the idea of putting together a documentary where a satanic group does these things. And that's where the idea of the Satanic Temple came in.
Naturally, they held a, tongue-in-cheek press conference thanking Governor Scott for this new law, which technically allowed them, the Satanists, to also spread their gospel of Satan in public schools.
We honor Governor Rick Scott, hail Satan, Rick, for providing us this opportunity to make the satanic cause clear and make our presence known.
But what started as a political stunt turned into a surprisingly popular movement. Lucien was stunned.
I don't think we anticipated the degree to which people would latch onto it, want to identify with it, and the degree to which people would want to start congregations and things like that.
So the group began to stress test the foundation of religious freedom in America by demanding one simple thing: to be given the same rights accorded to mainstream religions.
The bagpipes had just started playing once again. This is all happening because the newly formed after-school Satan Club is holding an open house.
Organizers say the after-school Satan Club is designed to counter after-school Christian clubs holding meetings inside public schools.
The after-school Satan clubs were very much in reply to desperate requests we were getting from people in school districts where there were these good news clubs. And good news clubs were put together by this organization called the Child Evangelism Fellowship. So when we did put in our after-school programs based on a precedent set from the Supreme Court in the early 2000s where they allowed these good news clubs to be put into schools.
Okay, let me provide a little background here. In a 2001 case, the Supreme Court ruled that if public schools give space to secular after-school clubs, like the chess club or drama, they can't prohibit religious clubs from having space. This led to an effort by a Christian program called the Good News Clubs to set up in public schools across the country. Lucien and his followers, taking the ruling at its word, decided to test the limits of this supposed open-door policy.
Satanic Temple has 10 after-school clubs in 6 states, which is a flash in the pan compared to the Child Evangelism Fellowship's 3,000 good news clubs in the U.S., plus 80,000 worldwide.
We didn't want to put in an after-school club just to spite them that would teach Satanism or that would refute Christian doctrine. We're not interested in that. But we leaned in on the idea of education and critical thinking and building the reasoning skills. We very much wanted to lean into our affirmative values. And I think people think that's in some ways that what we're doing are these kind of like petty pranks where we're utilizing a loophole. No, these aren't loopholes at all. We are following the law to the letter and I think to the original spirit. And if people fail to realize that, we will lose these rights.
Professor Helfand sees it largely the same way.
American constitutional law has a long history of people trying to push the envelope in terms of identifying boundaries of constitutional law. When they test it and we get frustrated with them, our frustration is really a reflection of our frustration with existing legal rules. If we had good legal rules, then we could answer anybody's questions. It's like when you're dealing with your kid, you know, they're pushing the envelope and they're messing around, and if they're pissing you off, it's probably because you don't have a good set of rules as to how you want to deal with them, not because they're doing anything that's inherently problematic.
What the Satanic Temple is probably best known for is their, I guess you would say, darkly humorous attempt to erect a satanic-themed sculpture on government grounds in Oklahoma.
They had put a Ten Commandments monument on the Capitol grounds. They thought they could avoid an establishment clause problem by stating that because it was a private donation, that it wasn't government speech. Of course, that just begged the question then of what they would do if offered a satanic monument in the name of pluralism and diversity.
The New York-based Satanic Temple says if Oklahoma can put a Ten Commandments statue on the Capitol grounds, they should be able to put their statue on the grounds as well.
So we put together a crowdfunding campaign for $20,000, which was laughably under budgeting, you know, what the ultimate cost would be. And we came up with what we thought was a very apt kind of symbolic monument for exactly what we were trying to do, which was our Baphomet monument.
Finally revealed, a goat figure with children at its feet, the monument the Satanic Temple hopes will soon sit at the state capitol.
It's a 7-foot-tall, goat-headed demon sitting on a throne with 2 children next to it.
It's this goat-headed sabbatical goat that, points upward and points downward, is part animal, part human, and the ultimate message being one of these reconciliation of opposites, which we felt was very appropriate symbolically for our mission of trying to reconcile these kind of binary opposites of Satanism and Christianity. I think our message is that we feel that we can coexist together, even if we do feel that we have opposing belief systems.
Whether because of the Satanist effort or not, the Oklahoma State Supreme Court ultimately ruled that the 10 Commandments on the Capitol lawn did in fact violate the state constitution. So it wouldn't go up, and neither would the goat-headed creature. The temple, undaunted, switched their focus to a different place to test the limits of religious pluralism in America.
The Satanic Temple will hold a rally at the Arkansas State Capitol Thursday, August 16th. The centerpiece of the rally will be a satanic statue of Baphomet.
The Satanic Temple says the organization is being discriminated against because the state will not install a satanic monument on the Capitol grounds.
We moved our campaign to Arkansas, where we also asked to put the Baphomet monument alongside the 10 Commandments monument. And at some point, we performed a rally in Arkansas where we brought the monument to the Capitol grounds outside the State House, and we had this day-long rally.
It's a beautiful day here at the State Capitol. Great day to be a Satanist. I believe it, and I'm very excited about it.
A very confident Lucian testified about his group's intentions to the Arkansas State Subcommittee of the Capitol Arts and Grounds Commission.
What are you memorializing, or what is your monument to?
Well, we think that our monument commemorates what makes America great, and in our case, we believe that that's religious liberty.
And you mentioned earlier that if the 10 Commandments monument doesn't go up, then you would withdraw this request.
Correct. What we're trying to avoid is the appearance of one religious viewpoint apparently co-opting the power and the authority of a government institution. We feel that that is unconstitutional.
This was nearly a decade ago, and the case still has no verdict.
The judge just simply has not ruled. It's just been sitting for years, not getting ruled upon. The litigation is still open, but we've just heard nothing from the court.
So over the last few years, the group has focused their activism on what they see as a different, more pressing constitutional issue.
The Satanic Temple is the latest religious group trying to challenge Indiana's near a total abortion ban.
The national organization filing the suit in the United States District Court of Southern Indiana.
Our philosophy is very much based on Enlightenment values that uphold pluralistic individualism, and we feel that this is fundamental to our deeply held beliefs, that the government really does have no right to encroach upon our religious liberty to practice our bodily autonomy.
Rhetorically very adept, Lucian uses constitutional language to make the point that bodily autonomy itself is a religious right. The Satanists even held a specific religious ritual to make their point.
We have this abortion ritual in place that is meant to kind of have that kind of therapeutic value in having somebody kind of introspect upon their ability to choose these things and affirm for themselves that this choice is in alignment with their beliefs and know that their religious community supports them in that decision. And the government is very reticent to impede a religious practice, especially when it has a ritual component to it. And we feel now that we have a very strong legal argument for upholding our right to abortion. And we brought different lawsuits against abortion restrictions in different states.
The lawyer for the Satanic Temple says they are the only group taking this approach to the abortion bans, and for that reason, he believes he could take this lawsuit all the way to the Supreme Court.
They've sued states over access to it, even launching what they call the first ever religious abortion clinic network.
we've started up abortion clinics of our own. They're pharmaceutical-based telehealth clinics. We have one based in New Mexico, which was our first one, which we called the Samuel Alito's Mom's Satanic Abortion Clinic.
So get your abortion today in the name of Samuel Alito's mom. You can find out more on our website at thesatanictemple.com and Samuel Alito's Mom's Satanic Abortion Clinic.
And then we have one in Maine now and another one in Virginia. Ultimately, our argument is going to be that we have the religious liberty to send these abortifacients over state lines and even into states that restrict or ban abortion, because on a federal level, our religious liberty is protected.
As unique and creative, whether you like them or not, as these tactics have been in countering anti-abortion regulations in the U.S., Lucian has paid a deep personal price for his work.
We have our headquarters in Salem, Massachusetts, and we've had people attack the headquarters before. Somebody threw a pipe bomb on our patio most recently. Somebody lit it on fire. I get death threats all the time, and that led to me actually getting a canine dog, a Dutch Shepherd Malinois mix trained for protection purposes, which is also a complete lifestyle change because now I have this dog with me all the time.
He may not be able to grab a coffee anonymously anymore, but Lucian Greaves does sit firmly in a very grand American tradition, along with Newton Cantwell, Ellery Shemp, and Joe Kennedy, all really ordinary people whose extraordinary convictions has forced the country to fight about what freedom of religion really means. Perhaps Americans will never reach consensus on how to interpret this very important clause of the First Amendment. But I think we can agree that in America, even Satanists get a seat at the table. In our next episode, we are going to tackle what is probably the most controversial and really misunderstood of the First Amendment rights: free speech. It's a good one, packed with pornography, dirty words, and satirical incest. You don't want to miss it. This podcast was made possible through a grant from the Frick Initiative at Washington University in St. Louis. Richard Fawal and Liberty Vittert are executive producers. Noam Osbend is senior producer, Susanna Casisa is producer, and Trevor Hook is assistant producer. This podcast was written by Noam Osbend, Olivia Jampol, Liberty Vittert, Susanna Casisa, and Richard Fawal. Audio engineers are Ismael Balderas Wong and Jonathan DeLeon. Sound design and original music composition by Ismael Balderas Wong. Stephanie DeLeon-Sick and Susanna Casisa did archival research, and Laura Krebs was our finance director.
Topica.